brought you here today. Give them a wave and a big thank you for bringing you to Friday of Writers Week 30. So Writers Week, of course, happens with the combined efforts of a lot of people. So we would like to thank the Friend Boosters. If your parents are boosters or adults in your house are boosters, please thank them because without the Friend Boosters, Writers Week would look quite a bit different. Also, a huge thank you to the Friend Tech crew. Let's give it up for them. They have worked so hard every day of this week. Writers Week is, like you see it during your English class and maybe another period that you come in here. But Writers Week is 40 hours of content this week, and every one of them requires the talent and dedication of the Friend Tech crew. So we truly, truly appreciate you. So Writers Week clearly would not also happen without students, without you being in the audience, being who you've been, not only for the past 4 days, but also some version of you for the past 30 years. So when Mr. Anderson and I were trying to figure out what we were going to do to celebrate 30 years of Writers Week, one thing we are always clear about is that student periods continue to be the most popular periods of any guests that we book. It's always students, always. That's how it should be. And so when we were thinking about that, we were like, well, the closest thing that we can get to that is to bring back some of our grads who did great things in writing and Writers Week when they were students here at Friend, who continue to do great things out in their adult world. And sending those emails and getting those responses was some of the most fun we had in planning this week, because when you're emailing back and forth with a writer's agent, let's say, they are just like, oh, thank you so much. We'll check our schedule and get back to you, or maybe not. But with the grads, it was big excitement, high energy, almost immediate responses. And it has been just a joy for us to welcome, who are now friends back here to Friend and back to Writers Week. And we are so fortunate. You might know that one day, or you are right now sitting in the audience of Writers Week, and some of you have been on the stage of Writers Week. One day, we may send you an email and you might be back to share stories of your adult life as well. So I do not want to take up too much time here. So I am going to introduce the two graduates sitting behind me. We have 2011 grad Rukmini Garish, and and also 2016 grad Anusha Kodakora. So we are going to start things off with Ruki. Please welcome to the Writers Week stage.
Thank you. I have two pieces for you today. The first one is about one of my first jobs out of college, which was at one of the big theaters in Chicago. I worked in their call center, selling subscriptions and raising funds. Phone sales is one of the most thankless jobs out there, so do not recommend it. And this piece is about one of the reasons why. Also, I'm not here to call anybody out, so when you hear me knock on the podium, consider that a redacted from identifying information. This piece is called Hello. Hi, my name is Rukmini, and I'm calling from theater. Is this... Yeah, that's me. I was calling first off to say thanks very much for coming to see. How did you enjoy the show? It was good. Was there anything in particular you enjoyed? I'd love to. What are you actually calling about? Well, I was calling for the feedback, but we're also doing a fundraiser. I'm not giving you any money. That's fine. If you have any feedback about, I'd still be happy. Click. Already, I am lying to you. I very rarely hear a click when someone hangs up on me because almost nobody has a landline anymore. You hear a voice you don't want to hear, you press a red button, not even a real button, an image of one with no mass and therefore no power to displace particles and make a sound, and the line is cut silently. This only creates more confusion because I sometimes end up talking for 10, 20, 30 seconds after you have hung up on me, words vanishing into a void. Even the word line is a lie, for there are no phone lines anymore. There are only waves and satellites moving through the emptiness of space. I choose not to edit out these lies because they are some of the incorporeal bodies that comprise the call center's constellation. Perhaps this is fitting. There is no I or you until someone picks up the phone. I, you, we float aimlessly above a blank, dark stage until, hello? Then the lights come on, you and I crash to the ground, and the show begins. I build, I paint my face, I dance like a performing monkey to entice you closer, closer until we complete a transaction. You duck, you dodge, you resist my pull, and rarely you come without resistance. There is a you and I, fragmentary. I only learn one or two things about you, build an I in response, a gravitational I which attracts you to me, the theater. You do not know that we are already in a theater, performing for ourselves alone. I was calling first off to say thank you very much for coming to see. How did you enjoy the show? Oh, it was awesome. I decide you are young or casual. Totally enjoyed it. I must become casual too. Awesome, awesome. Hey, what did you like so much about it? I'm just looking for some feedback for the artistic team. Well, the writing was great. I'm a huge fan of that playwright. Really? Well, have you heard he's doing another new play with us next season? A poster, a pamphlet, a flyer to stick above my computer on the gray industrial fabric that walls me into my cubicle. My theater is trying to catch up with the world. Our artistic director has realized that poor white men and unhappy white families are not the only subjects of confrontational theater. We must ensure that our subscribers become younger, less rich, less white, less prejudiced. This is why I still take ownership of theater. I understand that this change will take time, that we cannot simply banish all the older rich people, especially because they give us so much of our money. I have had to learn to separate my theater from its patrons. The prevailing view is that it is good to close a big donation from a prejudiced person because we will be using it to bring public school children, many of them students of color, to see theater, because we will be using it to pay women and people of color and queer and trans people to write and direct and craft and act in our plays. We can do better. We can always do better. But we are trying. Trying is an endless state of being. Hi, my name is Rukmini and I'm calling from. Hi, my name is Rukmini and I'm calling from. Hi, my name is Rukmini and I'm calling from. If you say something 3 times, your listener is more likely to remember that information. What about 3,000? Ruth? Rebecca? Who are you? What's your name again? Could you repeat that? Can you spell it? My name is not important, no one's is. Ben is called Dan all the time. When we say our names, they do not signify ourselves. Instead, we, they, the names signify theater. I remain loyal. I do my job to the best of my ability, even if it means breaking myself into smaller and smaller and smaller bits. Bits so small that I wonder whether I'll be able to put myself back together again. I resolve not to give you, the reader, specific information about our patrons because it is unlawful for me to do so. I resolve not to give you full conversations because our scripts, the scripts produced on our metaphorical stages, are the property of the company. I resolve to redact the very name of the theatre that pays my wage from this essay. I resolve not to do this even though mine is bandied about, mangled, in service of the company. Here is what Frank Henke said to me after I asked him for a donation. I will not tell you, the reader, whether or not this is his real name. Send me something in the mail, and I'll probably send you something, if you'll tell me the derivation of your name. No. No. If you are asking out of genuine interest, if the conditional, if you do not recognize the power structures at play here, if you're an old white man, if I'm a young woman of color, if I have a friend who wants to work here, if he is a young black man, if I have told him that theater is a great place to work, if he has an interesting or unusual or tiresome name as well, if I must tell him about this, warn him, if I am an employee, if I am further a customer service representative, if I am supposed to keep these people happy, if it's been a slow couple of shifts, if I am supposed to raise $350 this week, if this man has donated large amounts in the past, if this is my job, if I don't even know how to respond, if I cannot hang up on him, if I cannot yell at him, if I must say something, then, I tell him. I was used to existing between the fragments of I in a void, an absence of emotion, thought, feeling, being. It is easier to construct an I instead of deconstructing than reconstructing when the next you picks up the phone. Frank Henke tried to take the very gravitational force holding those fragments in a discernible shape. He shook the entire system so hard that the fragments now align differently. Now there is even more room for not emotion, not thought, not feeling, not being. It is dangerous to exist in the vast spaces between fragments of my I. The void has become so large, I'm not sure I can find my way back to the center. I spoke to my boss about Frank Henke. That's the definition of a microaggression. How would you have liked the conversation to go? I guess I'd like to say I'm not comfortable telling you that, and here's why, but I've literally never been in that situation before. Everybody asks about my name, but nobody's ever made a condition of anything. Has something like this ever happened to you before? I mean, I've had people assume I'm not from here. Happens to Michael, too. Look, the first thing I want is for you to feel comfortable. You're you first, not an employee. If something like that happens again, do whatever you're comfortable doing. But if you say you don't want to explain your name or don't want to tell someone where you're from and they get upset or keep asking or anything, pass the call to me. It's not your job to have to deal with that. But I will already have dealt with it. Why did I need a white man to tell me that I can be me first and not an employee? There is space to exist in the call center. There is space for bodies, this is important. Ben has a baby face without his beard. He writes screenplays and we talk about writing. Brian sings tenor and wears glasses like I do. Charles's straggly gray hair blows in any available breeze as he complains about the weather, no matter what the weather is. Issa is one of the blondest people I have ever met. He's very quiet, but does improv outside work. Marilyn loves listening to the White Stripes. She always wears lipstick. Michael is the only one who grew up catching balls like I did. 2 hands, no mitt. He and his ginger beard are from London. We have space to be bodies. But still, Ben and Michael can be aggressive over the phone. They ask 4 and 5 times, and the worst that will happen is that someone will hang up on them. Do you talk over me and interrupt and hang up with far more frequency because I, fitting together to complete a transaction or to resist, retract, recede into the distance, I detach. And they all have usual names, and all of them except Brian are white, and the familiar is easy and important, and signifiers, theirs, don't have to do so much work. Presentation is a choice. When a self is constantly recreated as a series of lies and images, eventually there is no self. There is only a few pieces of lumber, some screws, and a bit of pain, ready to be formed into a facsimile of place in which people play out their fantasies. So I leave this last bit of white space to you. Use it as you would. Thank you. Thank you. The second piece, because we're supposed to do some Taylor Swift, is called Cardigan. At the end of my presentation at my last Writers' Week, 13 years ago, if anyone's counting, I walked back to a slightly sagging couch, feeling a little bit of loss. The piece I just read about the joys, trials, and many, many quirks of being student assistant for Viking Theatre was the beginning of a lot of lasts on this stage and in this theatre. But I'd come back, I decided. I'd come back as a real adult writer, and that would be a sign that I'd really made it. And here I am. I've really made it. Kind of. When I pictured my triumphant return, it was always with a book in my hand, my name on the front cover, a whole period to myself, like Sierra de Mulder and Mary Fons. Time for questions about what the life of a professional writer was like. When the invitation to read at Writers' Week 30 landed in my inbox, I was a few months into a break from trying to be a writer. I told myself it would be a year long. 1 year where I might journal, I might not, but that would be it. I put no pressure on myself to create, to research, to submit. The piece I just read, it's one of my favorite things I've ever written. It's never been accepted for publication. I spent a year querying a memoir, sent it to 26 different agents, and when I heard anything at all, it was, this sounds like an interesting story, but memoirs are really hard to sell these days. I didn't connect with the voice on the page as strongly as I would have liked. It's just not the right fit for my list. Over and over, there's only so many times you can hear, it's not you, it's me, before you stop believing it. If this were fiction, I could spend the rest of my time telling you how receiving that email from Mrs. Ng made me remember that any dream coming true is cause for celebration. That writing this, the first new piece I've worked on in a very long time, drew stars around scars, finally healed after a months-long break from rejection. I could make a metaphor about rediscovering an old cardigan and realizing it was my favorite. But this isn't fiction, and only the first part of what I said is true. Kind of. What Mrs. Ng's email actually made me realize is that I've lost any sort of perspective about my dreams. When I was sitting in those seats, my dreams were big. Be a published writer, make a difference. But the lure of the unattainable was too strong. I needed something to chase, so I published essays. And I dreamed of books. When someone came to a show I did and told me he'd never seen his experience as a queer Asian person reflected on stage until now, I dreamed of having thousands of people say the same. I kept chasing until the sheen wore off the unattainable and settled around me like fog, like failure. I've only come back to Writers' Week as an alumni. A few weeks ago, I was having one of those days. I configured the Museum of Contemporary Art's ticketing software, and I was supposed to be redoing the way one of our admission discounts work. a process so complicated that one of the staff saw the whiteboard where I plotted out what I needed to do and said it looked like particle physics. I was also the only manager on site and 3 people were out sick, so instead of working on the particle physics, there I was at the box office selling tickets so our staff could have lunch breaks. One of the staff came back from his break to take over for me and asked if I was going on lunch now. I don't know, I said. You saw the particle physics. That has to be done today. I might just eat at my desk while I work. Take a little break, he said. 15 minutes, clear your head. I made a face and I went down to my desk, fully intending to ignore him. But instead I microwaved my lunch and read up on cricket news while I ate. Australia were about to start a test match against Pakistan, and there were endless questions about who would make both teams. A few hours later, I discovered some unexpected problems with my plan for the particle physics, and was about ready to throw my keyboard when another member of the staff came to the office. Ça va? She asked. She's from France and misses speaking the language. I studied it here and in college. Oh, je suis énervée, I sighed. Il y a des problèmes inattendus et je n'ai personne à qui je peux. I trailed on. I last spoke French regularly in college, and though I'm not as rusty as I used to be, I never learned how to discuss technology. Tu veux prendre un thé? She asked a little hesitantly. C'est ce que je suis venue faire. For the second time that day, my first reaction was no. But for the second time that day, I ignored it. We chose our tea bags from the cabinet in the office, walked down the hall together to the break room to get hot water from the coffee machine, and walked back to the office, chatting about nothing in particular. She went back up to the box office, I went back to my computer, and I figured out the problems and got the discount redone and tested just before the staff brought the cash drawers down and we had to count out for the day. A few days later, I found both of those staff and thanked them. For reminding me to be human, I guess, I said. What I really meant was that I was grateful that they prioritized my humanity over the fact that I'm their manager. I hadn't complained much. I hadn't said that I was stressed out. But through tiny acts of kindness, they reminded me that we are all people with needs, and that that is much more important than rule sets, source codes, and modes of saying. When I think about my dreams, general and specific, they all come back to the same thing. Seeing people deeply and being seen in return. Would I like to come back to Writers' Week again with a book in my hand, my name on the front cover? Absolutely. But until that happens, I'll dream of making it a habit to make a difference in small ways, and if I'm lucky, big ones too. So, thanks for having me here, Mrs. N. When someone feels like an old cardigan, there are so many ways of telling them they're your favorite. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anusha. I'm a 2016 Fram graduate. I'm so proud to be here today at the 30th Writers' Week as an alum. Just a bit of background about myself. I got involved in politics at a young age. Early high school, knocking on doors for candidates running for office. Getting involved in campaigns was my way of making an impact on the world, helping elect people to positions of power that shared my values. During my time at Friend, I was involved in activities like debate and Model UN. That's where I met some of the people that I call my best friends, and I felt like campaigns were a real-world outlet for me to talk to people about the issues that I care about. I worked in politics ever since. Even when I wasn't working a full-time political role, I've done something on the side to help candidates I care about win their elections. Of all the things I've done in my life, what I'm most proud of is that almost 3 years ago, I asked my best friend to run for office. And after that, I helped elect my best friend to be the youngest woman and the first Indian woman ever elected to the state legislature. You might know her. Her name is Nabila, or Representative Syed, as I like to call her as much as possible. She's sitting right here, and if you're here for next period, you'll get to hear her speak as well. The story of how it happened is just a small slice of the full saga. It doesn't include the before of how our friendship was so closely tied to our passion for politics and our shared values. And it doesn't include the after of how she was elected. We've gotten the chance to work together to pass a bill into law, and are now working on another one. But what I wanted to share today is that small slice of what it was like for us to embark on that very challenging, but very rewarding, to say the least, journey. During some of the lowest lows on the campaign trail, I would try to use humor to alleviate some of the pain. And one of my recurring jokes was that, like every politician, Nabila would one day release a tell-all memoir. And at the very least, our trials and tribulations made excellent memoir content. So I wrote this piece as if I were to help write one of the early chapters. And I want to make the disclaimer that any people I talk about with a negative attitude just reflect my attitude at the time. They're great people and we get along fine now. And I also hope that regardless of your political views, there is something valuable that you can take away from this story. As far as my Taylor Swift inspiration, I really wanted to go the fearless route, but I think the piece has more reputation bias, so that's what it is. It was May of 2021. Nabila and I were clicking around the clunky Illinois General Assembly webpage trying to load the latest version of the 2022 State House District maps. Following the 2020 census, the General Assembly was in the process of drafting and finalizing new maps based on population changes. For whatever reasons, legislators love hacking Palatine into bits and pieces, putting sections into a corner of a district with some other town as its heart and center. So each time we checked the maps, Nabila and I couldn't tell which district we would end up in. We didn't know who would be running for office on our side of the aisle. We were coming off a post-campaign high, just having led a friend to victory for a seat on the District 211 school board. For months, we had worked together to manage his campaign, raising money, organizing volunteers, building our endorsement list, and it was all done remotely. I was in Boston for grad school, and Nabila was in Berkeley finishing her senior year of college. Over FaceTimes and Zooms, we drafted policy platforms, prepped for candidate forums, updated budgets, and during the final week of the election, we both impulse bought tickets back home so we could spend whatever free time we had knocking on doors. This is spring of 2021, so our classes were mostly remote. How we got Tim to run for office was another story, but the gist of it is that we met at a local Black Lives Matter rally, and I have jokingly mentioned that if he wanted to run for school board, I could help manage his campaign. I didn't hear from him for a few months after that, until he reached out and said that he was getting some help from folks to help file his petitions for office, and asked if Nabila and I were still down to manage his campaign, which of course we were. Electing Tim to office felt so validating. For me, there was something surreal about seeing something through from inception to reality and feeling like I played a crucial part of it. So back to us clicking around on district maps, Nabila and I wanted to find out what district we were in to see what the next big race was going to be, and to find a candidate that we could help next. But as we clicked around and saw what little information there was about the people who were throwing their hats in the ring, let's just say that neither of us were particularly enthusiastic. It was hard to reach the level of excitement about another candidate that we felt about Tim, both because he was our friend, but also because of his reasons for running and the sense of urgency around racial justice issues at the time. And so over FaceTime, as we were scrolling, I asked a question that would alter our lives. Nabila, why don't you run for state representative? The story doesn't quite skyrocket from there. We definitely had been known for having the audacity to do something like that, and had the audacity, again, riding the high from Tim's campaign, which felt similarly audacious. But as we slowly started to think about what this could look like, and if it were really feasible over the next few days and weeks, Nabila got a call from Northwestern Hospital saying that she was a donor match for a family friend that needed a liver. Full story to come if you're staying for next period. So this idea of running for office was on pause, to say the least. I don't think we had even talked about it much for the next few months, beyond sending each other info on the other candidates in the race as we saw it, with no responses. Really not excited. So So 2 weeks after her surgery, when Nabila called me and told me that she's all in and wanted to run for office, I was surprised, but still ready. At the end of the day, I had nothing to lose. Nabila was the one with a lot more to lose, and she was all in. This was another fun project for me, and to be honest, I don't have a lot of experience with losing. And at that point, Nabila would be my third candidate. And so we set off to launch a campaign for state representative. We went through the typical campaign launch checklist: making a logo, drafting our website, talking to local leaders to get their support, raising money, etc. Again, things that I had done before. But it became very clear, very quickly, that while people loved working with me and Nabila when we were supporting their candidate of choice, many had quickly turned sour when they heard Nabila wanted to run for self. Even before launching, here are some of the things that we heard. I'd like to comment on those things from the perspective that I have today. Number one, why don't you try running for something a little more realistic first, like school board? My response to that is, if Nabila wanted to run for school board and be on school board, she could have done that. And school boards shouldn't be launching pads for higher office. On the school board, you could have an incredible impact. But also on the school board, Nabila would not have been able to pass bills like a ban on price gouging of prescription drugs, or a bill allowing 16-year-olds to pre-register to vote, or a bill that gives organ donors 5 days of paid leave. Another thing that we heard: primaries can be really divisive. I think you should get behind the other person who's already running. My response: I thought the whole point of having a democracy and having a primary election is that we could decide who we think the best candidates are, not to rally around the first candidate that comes along for fear of creating division. And the third thing, and the one that we were hearing the most often at the time, and while I would like to support you, but I think that someone like you would have a hard time winning an election in an area like this. And this one hurt the most, because it was the most difficult to answer, and the most personal. And this is what we heard the most from people that we initially thought would be supportive. People that we worked with on Tim's campaign for school board didn't have a problem that he was a black man running for a seat in a district that was only 5% black. And I had felt that there were so many parallels between Tim and Nabila's candidacies. But I realized that if there were a more palatable candidate running in that race that against Tim that these folks could have gotten behind, Tim wouldn't have gotten their support either. And this came a lot from well-intentioned people who truly felt like they were doing us a favor by being very discouraging. It's not that we wouldn't vote for you, but the district probably would. To be clear, this was a lot more than just about Nabila's age. She was 22 at the time, but it was about the intersection of her identities as a young, South Asian, hijab-wearing Muslim woman that could not possibly connect with a majority white moderate district. It didn't matter that she was born and raised here, went to school here, called this community home. It just wasn't possible. And so to give us hope on this last point, I tried doing my research to find some other young candidate somewhere else in the country that had accomplished something similar. I thought that if we could find just one example, it would give us the peace of mind that it was possible. And maybe that we could pick up a few things from their playbook. After digging through candidate after candidate, it was clear that there was no example. All the other young candidates we saw were either in non-competitive primaries, running in districts where there were no competitive general elections, or white. And we could learn so much from each of them still, but it felt like there was an added barrier to what we were trying to accomplish, and that maybe there was a reason it hadn't been done before. I came across this James Baldwin quote recently. Those who say it can't be done are usually interrupted by others doing it. As many people as there were who were discouraging and rude, we eventually found that there were just as many people who were unbelievably generous and committed. But if we had quit in the beginning, when people told us to, we would never have discovered a whole community of support. Our morale in the early stages was so unbelievably low. We were chugging along, doing all the things that we were supposed to do,
Nabila raised a headline-grabbing amount of money and was knocking on doors for several hours a day. But of course, the pain and frustration of feeling pushed away from people that you thought you could count on took a toll. But crazy things started to happen. Crazy good things. Nabila called me after she finished knocking on doors one day to tell me that this one lady she was talking to was so inspired that she pulled out her checkbook and wrote a $1,000 check up to the campaign on the spot. I mentioned that I've worked on a lot of campaigns before. I've never experienced or heard of anything like that. There's another instance where we cold called a large donor who had given to several local candidates before, and the same types that were being discouraging to us, and he agreed to donate a large amount, potentially even more in the future. And even aside from donations, Nabila was having a great reception with people at the doors. Many folks just impressed that she took the time to talk to them. Very few concerned about her age or experience. And of course, people would be less likely to be vocal about this, but people didn't seem to care about her race or religion either. Another huge highlight of the campaign had a funny beginning. There was a student at Palatine High School that Nabila knew from their mosque, and he said that he had a bunch of friends interested in helping the campaign, and they wanted to put together a virtual meeting for people to find out how they could help. He said we could call it Students for Nabila. At the time, I was campaign manager, but I was so overwhelmed. I kept pushing off this event, thinking that there wouldn't be a lot of kids that showed up. Even if they did show up, they'd be very unlikely to want to help in ways that we needed, which was at that point knocking on doors and collecting petition signatures to get Nabila on the ballot. It was wintertime, and it was cold, so when I logged on to the student-organized Zoom that day and saw over a dozen students, which was way more than I expected, and they all nodded their heads yes when I asked if they would like to try knocking on doors, I again knew that we had something special. That winter, it was volunteer high school students from Palatine, Friend, all over the area that helped us get the petition signatures that we needed to get on the ballot. We knocked through the wind and snow, most days until our pens froze. The campaign felt isolating at times in the beginning. But there were so many make-or-break components and people who helped bring the campaign across the finish line. So many literal strangers who felt impassioned after a simple conversation with a Nabila or a volunteer. Over time, we had a whole team of people who were the ones doing it and didn't care about what others thought was possible. And there's so much more to this story, but I want to fast forward to some of the takeaways I had both after the primary and general election and after Nabila won her seat. I love the feeling of proving people wrong. But what feels the most vindicating is that now, the people who doubted us and discouraged us will think about what we accomplished before doubting and discouraging somebody else. I love that people can use Nabila as an example for what's possible. And I hope that if anyone somewhere else in the country is looking up examples of candidates like them who won a challenging election, they can see themselves in Nabila and know that it's possible to win an election in a district that doesn't look like them. And even outside of a political context, that if you keep going and ignoring the haters, you can find success on the other side. And thank you all for listening, and if you want to learn more about the campaign, there was a podcast a journalism student at Northwestern made. Her name's Lucia Barnum, and it's called Ground Game, and it's on Spotify. And thank you all so much for your time.
All right, thanks to Ruki and to Anusha. Let's have another round of applause. So we've been asking our graduates who've been nice enough to come back, take time out of your adult lives to come back to Friends. So I'll ask you two things. One is your own favorite Writers Week memory from when you were here, and also returning to Friends, what did you kind of think about, and what has changed the most for you? And maybe what has changed the least in coming back? Because one day, all of you will, not all of you, but most of you will probably come back to Friends for one thing or another, right? Whether it's a play or a sport event or Writers Week, you'll be back and you're going to notice some changes and some things that are just never, ever, ever change. So who would like to go first? Okay.
So many amazing Writers Week memories, but the one that is really memorable is I really wanted to see Sierra Mulder one year, and I hadn't been to see her before. I asked my teacher, like, is there any way that I could miss class? He said no. I said, what happens if I still go? He said, I have to mark you truant. And so then I got detention, but detention wasn't even that bad. That's like the secret that I learned, that it was a focus time for me to do my work before school. I don't know if being in a lot how that affects your record, but in my opinion, it was totally worth it. Sierra Mulder was great, and on top of that, of course, all the fanboys.
My favorite Writers Week memory was when we had the Neo-Futurists here. The Neo-Futurists, if you don't know them, are a performance group who perform 30-ish short plays in 60 minutes, all of which are true. I have a very clear memory of one of the plays that they did here, which was where they invited one of the students up from the audience, didn't give them any context, just went down the line, all the performers talked about physical injuries or scars that they had. The student caught on. And the last round was talking about an emotional scar that they had. It was the first time that I'd seen truth and theater, or truth in theater, and that's something that's really stayed with me and sort of shaped my work as well. Sure, I'll start with the second question. Sorry, what was the second question again?
What do you feel has changed the most? What do you feel has stayed the same?
Well, we didn't have somebody wearing a police vest greeting us when we came to school back in the day, so that was a big change. But I stopped by the English office when I came in here, and the first thing that Robin up there said was, do you see how much this has changed? And like I kind of nodded along, but honestly, the physical space has changed, but the vibe of the English office has very much remained the same. I was a frequent visitor back in the day.
I was trying to think about what it felt like to be on the stage the last time I was up on the stage, and I could remember for the show, it felt like I couldn't see anybody in the audience because it was pitch black. And I was like, maybe it's going to be like that again, but no, it's fully lit. I don't remember what it was like, I guess, for Writers Week. But the space feels a lot smaller. Like, I remember thinking the auditorium was like never ending, and there's thousands of people and like so many rows, but it feels like just like two classrooms worth of people. I know there's a lot more than that, but it just feels smaller.
All right. Second hour, you've been an amazing audience. One more. A great weekend. We are already looking forward to Writers Week 31.